the apocalypse. When an entire people are destroyed or destroy themselves. The end of civilization. For us today, as we go about our daily lives, it's barely something we consider. We're so sure it couldn't happen to us. But for some civilizations, it already has. The Rapa Nui. The people of the mysterious island known as Easter Island. One of the most remote on our planet. Situated in the Pacific Ocean, at the easternmost edge of the Polynesian Islands, 2,000 kilometers from the nearest inhabited land. When European explorers arrive on Easter Day in 1722, they find a society that seems like a tropical paradise. A true Garden of Eden. A civilization of almost 4,000 people. Women and men appearing to live as equals, surviving together at the ends of the known world. Protecting the people are their vast statues, the Moai. Huge human heads that look inward on the Rapa Nui as they live their lives. But this Pacific paradise, this heaven on earth, could not last forever. And by the late 1800s, the Rapa Nui all but disappear. With over 97% of the Rapa Nui population either dead or having abandoned the island. What happened to the Rapa Nui? What caused the ancient apocalypse of this earthly paradise? The Pacific Ocean, thousands of kilometers from the known world. The empires of Europe, Spain, England, Holland, are sailing the globe, seeking new continents. The men leading these quests are among the greatest seafarers of the age, with one exception.
Jacob Roggeveen is a most unlikely explorer. He's a Dutchman who is trained as a lawyer with absolutely no naval experience. But he's been raised by a father who was obsessed with discovery and who in particular died without fulfilling a long-held dream of discovering the fabled Terra Australis, which was a landmass that had been believed to exist somewhere in the southern hemisphere. Soon after his father dies, Jacob is thrown out of his hometown for espousing overly liberal religious views.
He decides he's got nothing left to lose, he's going to go for it. And when I say he's got nothing left to lose, the man is 62. And in 1721, that's pretty old. So he has a sort of very late midlife crisis.
And he somehow manages to convince the Dutch West India Company to fund him in a voyage of discovery in search of Terra Australis.
After sailing his 3 ships across the Atlantic, round Cape Horn, and heading for Polynesia, Roggeveen spots an uncharted land in the Pacific Ocean.
After 8 months at sea, he comes across this amazing island. And because he arrived there on Easter Sunday in 1722, he calls it Easter Island.
As Roggeveen approaches, he notices that the island is inhabited. These people are the Rapa Nui, which is their original name for the island. Roggeveen's ship's log vividly describes this very first encounter between Europeans and the Rapa Nui. An encounter that goes disastrously wrong. As he lands on the island with a troop of armed men, tragedy strikes.
The natives of Rapa Nui have never seen Europeans. They've certainly never seen a gun, and they don't have any idea about its destructive capabilities. And the natives crowd just a little bit too close to them. They get nervous, a scuffle ensues, and within minutes, tragically, 12 Rapa Nuians lie dead. What's perhaps most surprising is the reaction of the Rapa Nuians. They apologize effectively. They quickly scurry to gather together food offerings and even their own women for the Dutchmen, should they be so inclined.
The Rapa Nui give the Dutchmen sweet potatoes, bananas, and chickens. This is a land of hospitality and abundance. Roggeveen describes the island as exceedingly fruitful.
When the Dutch arrived, they found an island that they described as an earthly paradise. The island was extensively cultivated in plants like taro, sweet potato, sugarcane.
Roggeveen goes on to portray Rapa Nui society in fascinating detail, saying they are a tall, healthy people.
Roggeveen was incredibly interested in what the local people were wearing. Like woven garments that had been dyed. They were woven out of leaves. They also wore ornaments of like shells and feathers, and they had distended earlobes. They painted their faces, and they all looked incredibly alien to him and beautiful and unique.
But as Roggeveen explores further, he is not prepared for what he will find next. Around the edge of the island, Roggeveen sees huge stone statues. The Rapa Nui name for statues is Moai.
There are hundreds of them around the island, with their backs to the sea, looking inland, and they're enormous, and they're powerful, and they're beautiful.
There are almost 1,000 Moai on Rapa Nui, many of them standing on stone platforms called ahu around the coast of the island. Roggeveen gives the only eyewitness account ever of how the statues are used, a ritual that is never witnessed again. They kindle fire in front of certain remarkably tall stone figures they set up, and thereafter, squatting on their heels with heads bowed down, they bring the palms of their hands together and alternately raise and lower them. Roggeveen is the only foreigner to ever witness the Rapa Nui's mysterious ritual. The following morning, Roggeveen sets sail to continue his hunt for Terra Australis. And when Europeans next come to Easter Island, they find a dramatic change. "50 years after Roggeveen's departure, British explorer Captain James Cook sets off on his second round-the-world voyage of discovery with the British Navy.
Captain James Cook is one of the most famous British explorers of the 18th century, and he set sail throughout the Pacific.
In 1774, Cook lands at Rapa Nui, which he has heard of from Roggeveen's account. Based on Roggeveen's descriptions, Cook expects to find the same abundance and hospitality.
He decides to stop at this little speck of land because the crew is unwell. Cook himself is ill. They're suffering from scurvy and they need provisions. Now, Cook recognizes this island from having read Roggeveen's descriptions, but he also notices that there is something very wrong, very different from what Roggeveen observed.
He writes that it is undoubtedly the same that Admiral Roggeveen touched at in April 1722, although the description given of it by the authors of that voyage does by no means agree with it now.
He does get plantain and sweet potatoes, but that's about it. I mean, that's enough to cure them, but he doesn't get the fresh water he needs. The water that they give him is not pleasant, it's quite foul. And so he's completely confused and disappointed as to where this paradise had gone.
When Cook arrives, Moai have been toppled. He asks the natives himself, well, what happened here? And they give differing accounts, but one is that perhaps there was kind of civil dispute between rival clans on the island, or perhaps it was an earthquake. Much of what they find, frankly, horrifies them. They see a man eating a rat. They find that there are shallow graves with skeletons partly visible.
William Hodges, an artist on Cook's expedition, depicted the devastation. The few trees are barren of fruit. The once beautiful green fields are strewn with stones. The people are impoverished. Their houses are described as low, miserable huts.
In contrast to the healthy and vibrant population that Roggeveen has seen, Cook finds a decimated group of people.
Cook discovers that this Easter Island paradise has been replaced by a society in decline. Captain Cook departs on the 17th of March, 1774. But the decline of the Rapa Nui does not stop there. In fact, it gets far worse and results in the complete collapse of this island world, leaving the ultimate question: what causes the ancient apocalypse of the Rapa Nui? Nearly 2 centuries after Cook's visit to Rapa Nui, Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl arrives in 1955. And he finds a very different world to Cook. The Rapa Nui people have now all but vanished. Their society and their moai have collapsed. At the time of Heyerdahl's visit, the island doesn't even belong to its people. Instead, it's been taken over by the South American nation of Chile, expanding its territory in 1888. A time when the Rapa Nui population hit an apocalyptic low of just 111 people. Heyerdahl is here to uncover what leads the Rapa Nui into an apocalyptic collapse that by the end of the 19th century leaves just 3% of the Rapa Nui population alive. Heyerdahl believes the key to the demise of the Rapa Nui must be hidden in the moai. But Heyerdahl holds a deeply controversial theory about the Rapa Nui and their statues.
Heyerdahl believes that it could only be a great civilization that could have constructed these artistic masterpieces of the Easter Island statues. They must have come from somewhere where there was already great civilizations. And so he looks to South America and he sees similarities with the Inca culture. And he said, well, obviously these are the ancestors of the people who then traveled to Rapa Nui.
Heyerdahl and his team set to work to uncover the history of the moai.
When Heyerdahl and his crew finally arrive on Rapa Nui, he discovers this vast open quarry called Rano Raraku, where the tough the volcanic lava rock is exposed, and he sees loads of moai half finished.
The reason the moai are unfinished remains a mystery to this day. But the discovery in the quarry shows Heyerdahl where the moai are created. And that begs a question. How do the Rapa Nui move these huge rocks, weighing on average 14 tons, to their positions at the edges of the islands? Distances that are sometimes hundreds of meters. Heyerdahl believes a critical clue can be found in a unique feature of the island of Rapa Nui. The lack of trees.
Heyerdahl has seen that most of the Polynesian islands are populated quite densely in times with palm trees, but Rapa Nui doesn't have any palm trees. So this is a bit of a puzzle. Is it naturally deforested, or has something happened? Maybe that's a clue as to explain what happened to the people as well.
To look further into this, Heyerdahl uses a different technique to unlock the story of the island.
He digs into the sediments at the bottom of some of the lakes, and he's able to do pollen analysis from the tiny organic particles of ancient pollen that have been held in sediments in these lakes. And he discovers that actually Rapa Nui was originally fully forested and had a particular palm tree that doesn't exist anymore. It's extinct.
An entire palm tree species, now called the Rapa Nui palm, seems to have vanished from the island. But what caused them to disappear? And could the answer help explain the collapse of the Rapa Nui? Heyerdahl had heard of a Rapa Nui legend that the moai had supposedly walked to their sites. Heyerdahl believes this is impossible, so he attempts a different way to move the moai, a way that he thinks may prove where all the palm trees have gone. Using trees that were recently grown on the island.
He gets together 180 men, chops down a bunch of trees to create huge log rollers, and he drags the moai on log rollers. And he proves that it is possible, but it's obviously hugely time-consuming and requires an enormous resource of manpower. There are almost 1,000 moai on Rapa Nui, so Thor Heyerdahl reckons that if this technique of using log rollers was used to move each of those moai into position, then that pretty much explains why there are no trees on the island left. They all got chopped down to move these heads around.
Heyerdahl believes that this method of moving the moai is responsible for the deforestation of the island. And with the disappearance of the trees would have come life-threatening consequences. Once the trees are gone, this can lead to soil erosion. If the soil is eroded, then the Rapa Nui would be unable to plant and sustain their crops of sweet potato, taro, and banana. Heyerdahl's team sees a perfect storm, where building and moving the moai for protection leads to soil erosion and the inability of the Rapa Nui to feed themselves. And this isn't all they discover. As Heyerdahl's team continue their excavations, they make a deadly discovery. Blades made from obsidian, one of the sharpest volcanic rocks on Earth.
They would have been used perhaps as functional cutting knives, but also as weapons, as spear points or dagger blades.
Heyerdahl believes he finds evidence of weapons used for violent conflict on the island. For Heyerdahl, this idea ties in with a Rapa Nui legend that he knew had been told to earlier visitors. A legend of internal warfare.
Once upon a time, there were two tribes on the island, the long ears, the Hanau Ipe, and the short ears, the Hanau Momoke.
The ears refer to the Rapa Nui tradition of elongating the earlobes, something which Roggeveen witnesses. A fight between the two clans results in the long ears being wiped out.
So Heyerdahl thinks, well, maybe this explains everything. Why there was this huge decimation of the population.
Heyerdahl believes internal conflict is part of the cause for the collapse of the Rapa Nui. And then Heyerdahl's team make an even more shocking discovery. In a cave, they find human remains. Remains, Heyerdahl claims, come from a cannibal feast.
Heyerdahl looks at the weapons, he looks at the bones, and he starts to piece together a narrative. Well, maybe the mystery behind the Moai and the missing Rapa Nui civilization is because maybe they descended into warfare, maybe they descended into cannibalism.
Heyerdahl leaves the island in 1956, convinced that he has unlocked the mystery of the Rapa Nui. That after using all the trees on their island, life becomes unsustainable, and the Rapa Nui descend into chaos, violence, and cannibalism. According to Heyerdahl, this is the ancient apocalypse of the Rapa Nui. And for the next 4 decades, Heyerdahl's theory that the Rapa Nui are masters of their own downfall dominates what people think about Rapa Nui Island. But is this truly their ancient apocalypse? In 1994, an international team of geneticists, led by Oxford and Cambridge universities, turned their attention to the origin of the Rapa Nui. Who really were the people of this lost civilization? They make use of pioneering techniques to analyze the DNA in bones. They extract DNA from skeletons that had been excavated by Heyerdahl. What they uncover is a sequence that is unique to the DNA of people from Polynesia, and these are found in all the samples. There appears, scientifically, to be no chance that the Rapa Nui came from South America, as Heyerdahl believed. The Rapa Nui are Polynesian. So how did Polynesians get to Rapa Nui?
Rapa Nui is the most remote inhabited island on our planet. It's 2,200 kilometers away from the nearest inhabited island.
Polynesians are known as masters of the sea, and they cross the Pacific Ocean in specially made boats.
And they do so in lightweight catamarans, double-hulled, very fast craft. They don't have the charts and the instrumentation that European mariners are absolutely dependent on. But they're guided only by the stars, by the clouds, by their observations of sea currents and wave patterns.
With the Polynesian maritime know-how and the new DNA analysis, Heyerdahl's beliefs and theories come into question. And a new generation of scientists ask what really happened to the Rapa Nui. At the beginning of the millennium, American archaeologists Dr. Terry Hunt and Dr. Carl Lippo arrive on Rapa Nui.
The story that's been told about the island that we basically accepted was that deforestation was devastating to the island's population, and that the population had peaked and crashed and experienced what some authors have called ecological suicide, or ecocide for short.
They excavate at Anakena, the only beach on the rocky coastline of Rapa Nui.
The excavations revealed things like fishhook fragments. Probably the important record there was the remains from animals like birds, fish, sea mammals.
But then comes the first of many surprises. As Hunt and Lippo dig into the beach, they find thousands of rat bones.
We were surprised, I think, to see the very large numbers of rat bones and how dominant it was as the remains of animals found there.
As they investigate further, they notice that the rat bones suggest that these rats were eaten.
The Polynesians, in colonizing the Pacific Islands, carried with them plants and animals. So to Rapa Nui, they brought with them rats and chickens.
The reality is, the rat was always a very staple protein source for the Polynesian people, even before they settled Rapa Nui.
Rats would reproduce at an absolutely phenomenal rate, literally growing into the millions within a few years.
Rats would provide the Rapa Nui with a consistent source of food. But then Hunt and Lippo make a startling discovery about what the rats themselves eat.
I have palm nuts here, and rats have gnawed into this. You can actually see the teeth marks from the rat gnawing.
Hunt and Lippo's work shows that palm nuts, the seeds from which the Rapa Nui palm tree grows, were being eaten by the newly arrived rats. And this would have a disastrous effect on the life cycle of the palm trees.
The consumption, the predation of these seeds would have precluded the reproduction of the trees because they completely destroy the seed. And so this is really the kind of hard evidence of rat impacts on the vegetation of Rapa Nui.
The huge palm trees on Rapa Nui were particularly vulnerable.
They're one of the very largest palm species in the world. They're slow-growing palms, and they're slow at reproducing. The palms can't really keep up with what's going on in terms of predation on the seeds.
The palms on the island are being gradually destroyed by the rats. And then Hunt and Lippo make a new discovery that brings the whole question of the palm's importance in Rapa Nui life into doubt. Fire. Across the island, Hunt and Lippo find evidence of burnt palm trees. They believe that the trees are deliberately being burnt down, as they actually get in the way of Rapa Nui life.
Palm trees are a form of grass. They're basically giant tubes of foam that are in the interior. You can't make a canoe out of them. They're not really good house material. They're not really valuable in the sense of, what a traditional hardwood tree would be like.
Instead, the palms are being burnt to provide nutrients for a far more important form of vegetation: crops. The Rapa Nui appear to cut down the palms to provide them with space to grow taro, potato, and other crops. So the deforestation of the island and the extinction of the palms comes from the Rapa Nui burning the palms for crops, and rats destroying their seeds and any chance of new growth. Recent analysis points to all palms as having disappeared from Rapa Nui by 1650. Hunt and Lippo believe the Moai aren't moved using palms, as Heyerdahl suggested. So how are they moved? Rapa Nui legend has it that the Moai walk to their sites. Heyerdahl thought this was impossible, but Hunt and Lippo try it.
Here's a small modern replica of a Moai, and we can see some of the details here. They would have stood on ahu like this in a vertical position with the base being flat. But along the roadways, the base was not flat, but in fact the statue had a forward lean with a lower center of gravity in the lower portion of the statue. This enabled 3 ropes, one in the back, one from each side, and the statue to walk by falling forward and rocking. This is a walking motion, and it works very well. We were able to move a 4.5-ton statue with a maximum of about 18 people, and actually quite easily.
Not only does this method use much less manpower, it doesn't use trees, as Heyerdahl suggests.
The underlying assumption there is that the palms were used in transporting the statues and that things went into a downward spiral with deforestation. If you did want to use the palm trees as rollers, the Moai would be far too heavy and they would crush the palm that really just has a spongy interior.
Hunt and Lippo's work brings into question not just Heyerdahl's theories, but also the generally held view that the Rapa Nui had brought about their own downfall.
We began to realize that a lot of things that had been said about the island simply weren't true. There were contradictions in the evidence, and we realized that a narrative had evolved quite independently of the evidence itself. We began to realize that the whole story really had to be rewritten.
During his excavations in 1955, Heyerdahl claimed to have discovered weapons that were used in warfare. But Hunt and Lippo believe the finds tell a different story.
Heyerdahl and other archaeologists have considered the obsidian tools that are really common on Rapa Nui as weapons. Well, in fact, when we look at these tools, they're not shaped as weapons would be. Most of them are not pointed. Most of them have kind of a simple edge that is used for cutting and scraping. We find more of these in garden areas than we do in non-garden areas.
They seem to be agricultural implements used for cutting sweet potato. They don't seem to be used as a weapon.
While there may have been conflict on Rapa Nui, the evidence generally suggests that implements found by Heyerdahl are for agriculture rather than warfare. Hunt and Lippo's findings show a Rapa Nui culture that is about farming and working with the ecology of the island, not working against it, as Heyerdahl suggested. From the deforestation of the island's palms, through to how the Moai are moved, and how the Rapa Nui use tools for farming rather than fighting. Hunt and Lippo's work presents a different picture of life on Rapa Nui. But there's a problem. With Heyerdahl's theory seemingly disproved, what is the cause of the ancient apocalypse that brings Rapa Nui life to an end? The answer to what did destroy this island paradise now seems even harder to unearth. But a recent discovery provides a clue. in the very bones of the Rapa Nui. In 1999, a team of DNA specialists at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., analyzed bones from skeletons excavated on Rapa Nui. Bones that are buried in the years just after the first Europeans visited the island.
They were noticing something very unusual about the bodies buried there, and that was a lot of them had curved shin bones. So this is a classic sign that these people died with syphilis. They then tested the DNA of the bones, which confirmed to them that indeed these people had syphilis. Syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease. You'll get pustules around your mouth, around your genitalia, but it goes much deeper than that, and obviously, of course, in the end, it will kill you.
So where does the disease come from? One theory is that European sailors bring the disease with them in the 1700s, after Roggeveen puts the island of Rapa Nui on the map of European explorers.
These ships would stop at Rapa Nui for water. They began trading for food, and they also traded for sex. These several visits by European-based explorers in the 18th century, inevitable introduction of disease, including sexually transmitted diseases.
When Jacob Roggeveen arrives on the island in 1722, he finds an earthly paradise. But just 50 years later, Captain Cook finds a sick people in decline.
So between when the first Europeans visited the islands to when James Cook visited, there has been a decline. Could this be explained by the fact that syphilis had been contracted and was spreading throughout the population?
So if syphilis is the most likely reason for the decline between 1722 and 1774, that still leaves a big question. What happens to the Rapa Nui after Cook's departure in 1774? What is it that ultimately causes the ancient apocalypse of the Rapa Nui by the end of the 19th century? Dr. Gregory Cushman believes a clue may lie in the writings of a British woman who sailed to Rapa Nui decades before Heyerdahl.
Catherine Routledge, an early ethnologist, produced oral histories that she took from about a dozen elder Rapa Nui in the 19-teens.
Catherine Routledge and her husband William spend a year sailing to Rapa Nui, arriving in March 1914. Her aim is to make the first archaeological survey of the island. But once she gets there, she finds a few Rapa Nui people left clinging to existence and is determined to record their stories before they die out. Routledge carries out interviews and hears stories about how the Rapa Nui experience clan fighting and periods of drought. But there's one story that stands out for Cushman, with its basis in recent historical analysis. It has its origin in a distant cataclysm that begins in 1861. The American Civil War.
This war was fought about fundamentally slavery as an institution, but also the economic system of producing cotton on cotton plantations in the U.S. South.
Until the American Civil War, the U.S. is the world's largest exporter of cotton, a commodity that relies on slavery for its production. With U.S. cotton supply collapsing as the war engulfs the country, other suppliers smell an opportunity, particularly those in the coastal nation of Peru in South America.
Cotton grows excellently on the Peruvian coast, and there was an overt attempt by plantation owners to try to make some money off of cotton exports.
This attempt to make more money means only one thing: more slaves are needed. Peruvian slavers begin raiding the Pacific Islands for plantation laborers. Catherine Routledge's notes and Peruvian port records show that huge numbers of Rapa Nui are captured.
In December 1862, these ships arrived and began taking the Rapa Nui by force. According to the stories the Rapa Nui tell, sailors would grab them and tie them with rope as if we were sheep. Records suggest that as many as 1,300 Rapa Nui were taken off the island in these voyages at the end of 1862. This is probably around a half of the population in the island that was forcibly taken off to work on cotton plantations.
For those 1,300 that arrive in Peru, they are met with horrific working conditions. And it's believed many of them may have died from diseases on the plantations.
Dysentery and tuberculosis seem to be the diseases that the Pacific Islanders were most likely to catch, and that killed the largest number of them when they were on the coast of Peru.
Back on their homeland of Rapa Nui, with a population halved by slavers and already weakened by syphilis, the Rapa Nui are in mortal danger. And Cushman believes he knows what is the final nail in their coffin.
A number of foreign governments complained to the Peruvian government saying, this has to be ended. The Peruvian government made the decision that it was going to round up Pacific Islanders along the coast of Peru and send them back to the islands.
Traveling with the Rapa Nui is a missionary from France, Eugène Hérault, sent to turn Pacific Islanders into followers of Roman Catholicism.
Eugène Hérault was a French-born adventurer who decided later in life to give his life to the church. He wrote an official report, so that long letter remains as a record of what he saw. Eugène Hérault arrived in January 1864 during the waves of ships that would arrive repatriating workers. At least 100 Rapa Nui were put on this ship with the idea that they were going to be taken back home. They were crowded onto a single ship with 370 other Pacific Islanders.
With only Hérault's report in existence, it is not known exactly how many Rapa Nui make the journey from slavery back to their homeland. But what is known is that for those who make the return journey in these crowded conditions, many are struck by a deadly disease: smallpox.
162 people died on the ship and were thrown overboard. Only 15 of them made it back to Rapa Nui. Among those 15, at least a couple of them had smallpox, and it's very well documented that they brought the infection to the island. There's no doubt that hundreds of Rapa Nui must have died from the arrival of smallpox.
And the death of so many Rapa Nui also has horrifying consequences for the survivors. It destroys the ability of the Rapa Nui to read and write their own language, called Rongo Rongo.
Rongo Rongo consists of a series of symbols and characters that are incised onto wooden tablets. And scholars believe that it perhaps encoded religious beliefs and practices and explained certain rituals. But we don't know, and we may never know, because the Rongo Rongo remains undeciphered even today.
When Hérault finds written tablets he wishes to translate, it appears none of the living can help him.
One of the most tragic implications of the Peruvian enslavement of the majority of the Rapa Nui people is that they enslaved and killed all of their elite who possessed the knowledge of the Rongo Rongo tablets. And when they're gone, the Rapa Nui people who remain have no way to even read their own language anymore.
The ability to read their own language ends up buried with their disease-ridden dead. The Rapa Nui are in a death spiral. And soon, Ero will join them. Within a few years of his arrival on Rapa Nui, it is Ero who is next to succumb to disease. But rather than smallpox, Ero is infected with the fatal lung disease tuberculosis.
The next epidemic that scorched Rapa Nui was tuberculosis. Ero actually suffered from this himself, and eventually it killed him.
Ero dies in 1868. His death is one of many thousands on the island, brought on by an epidemic of disease. For the Rapa Nui, for their way of life, for their whole civilization, the waves of foreign-born disease proved to be fatal. From a population of around 4,000 when Roggeveen arrives in 1722, the decline of the Rapa Nui people begins with the arrival of the deadly disease, syphilis. Then, in the space of just 100 years, the Rapa Nui are stolen by slavers and ravaged by fatal diseases like smallpox and tuberculosis, wiping out 97% of the entire population. By 1877, just 111 Rapa Nui are left alive. While theories and beliefs continue to compete about the mysterious collapse of Rapa Nui life, from internal warfare to foreign slavers. With all Rapa Nui written records lost to history, we may never know exactly what brings this island nation to its knees. But the arrival of explorers in 1722 puts Rapa Nui on the map and brings the Rapa Nui into contact with an unforgiving world.
The global factors of introduced disease, of slave trading, these had devastating consequences for the Rapa Nui Islanders.
The story that we've told ourselves for a long time is that the Rapa Nui Islanders planted the seeds of their own destruction, that it was death by ecocide because they were so bad at looking after their environment. But actually, we're telling ourselves a lie. It wasn't ecocide that killed them. The people of Rapa Nui Island were killed because of Western visitors. You could argue that Easter Sunday 1722, when those first Dutch ships arrived on Rapa Nui Island, the people's fate was sealed.
But the Rapa Nui story doesn't end there. Those Rapa Nui who survived continue to fight for their life. From the 111 survivors, the population of Rapa Nui has steadily recovered. Today, approximately 4,000 indigenous Rapa Nui people live on the island, reviving their traditions as they live on, watched over by their mighty ancestors.